Okie dokie, good evening. It's late o'clock. It's about 1:30 in the morning, and I wanted to read something, and well, fuck, if I'm gonna read this, I might as well record me reading it because I hadn't read this before. I've had a Mao quote stuck in my head for the last, not stuck in my head, but running through my head over and over and over for the last few days when I've been talking with people about the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, when I've been having conversations about it, and trying to suss out how I feel about it. And the quote is it's a Mao quote. The quote that a revolution is not a dinner party. And I've had that running through my head over and over and over when I've been trying to process this. And I never actually read the source for it, the report on an investigation of the peasant movement in Hunan from March of 1927. The full quote is, secondly, a revolution is not a dinner party, or writing an essay, painting a picture, or doing embroidery. It cannot be so refined, so leisurely, gentle, so temperate, kind, courteous, restrained, magnanimous. A revolution is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. And he goes on, and I just posted about how it's been on my mind, but I talk a lot about citing your sources. I talk a lot about going to primary documents, primary sources, and trying to understand the context of things that we talk about before preaching about them. So I wanted to practice what I preach and read this original document, and I figure if I'm doing that, why not record it? Because it'll help me focus and it'll actually help me get through it. So, the importance of the peasant problem. During my recent visit to Hunan, I made a first-hand investigation of the conditions of the 5 counties of Heungchun, Gyeongsang, Gyeongshan, Luling, and Changshan. I should note this is written in Wade Giles, not in Pinyin, is the translation. So, like Qing Dynasty is not written Qing, it's written Ching. So my pronunciation of some of these things, I may even know some of these words and not know that I know these words, so I'm going to butcher a few things. In the 32 days from January 4th to February 5th, I called together a fact-finding conference in villages and county towns, which were attended by experienced peasants and by comrades working in the peasant movement. And I listened attentively to their reports and collected a great deal of material. Many of the hows and whys of the peasant movement were the exact opposite of what the gentry in Hankou and Changsha were saying. I saw and heard of many strange things of which I had hitherto been unaware. I believe the same is true of many other places too. All talk directed against the peasant movement must be speedily set right. All the wrong measures taken by revolutionary authorities concerning peasant movement must be speedily changed. Only thus can the future of the revolution be benefited. For the present upsurgence of the peasant movement is a colossal event. In a very short time, in China's central, southern, and northern provinces, several 100 million peasants will rise like a mighty storm, like a hurricane, a force so swift and violent that no power, however great, will be able to hold it back. They will smash all the trammels that bind them and rush forward along the road to liberation. They will sweep all the imperialists, warlords, corrupt officials, local tyrants, and evil gentry into their graves. Every revolutionary party and every revolutionary comrade will be put to the test, to be accepted or rejected, as they decide. There are 3 alternatives: to march at their head, to lead them; to trail behind them, gesticulating and criticizing; or stand in their way and oppose them. Every Chinese is free to choose, but events will force you to make that choice quickly. Get organized. The development of the peasant movement in Hunan might be roughly divided into 2 periods, with respect to the counties and the province's central and southern parts, where the movement had already been much underway. The first, from January to September of last year, was one of organization. In this period, January to June was a time of underground activity. From July to September, when the Revolutionary Army was driving out Cho Hunti, one of open activity. During this period, the membership of the peasant associations did not exceed 300,000 to 400,000. The masses directly under their leadership numbered little more than 1 million. There was, as yet, hardly any struggle in the rural areas, and consequently very little criticism of their association in other circles. Since its members served as guides, scouts, and carriers of the Northern Expeditionary Army, even some of the officers had a good word to say for the peasant associations. The second period, from last October to January of this year, was one of revolutionary action. The membership of associations jumped to 2 million. The masses directly under their leadership increased to 10 million. Since peasants generally enter only one name for the whole family or joining a peasant association, a membership of 2 million means a mass following of about 10 million. Almost half the peasants in Hunan are now organized. Counties like Xiantang, the HS sound I struggle with. Xiantang, Zheng, Sheng, Yui, Yang, Changsha, Liling, Ningqing, Yingqing, Xiangying, Hengkong, Hengyang, Liyang, Zhenxian, and Anhua. Nearly all the peasants have combined into peasant associations or have come under their leadership. It was on the strength of their extensive organization that the peasants went into action and within 4 months brought about a great revolution in the countryside, a revolution without parallel in history. Down with local tyrants and evil gentry, all power to the peasant associations. The main targets of attack by the peasants are local tyrants, evil gentry, lawless landlords, but in passing, they also hit out against patriarchal ideas and institutions, against corrupt officials in the cities, and against bad practices and customs in rural areas. In force and momentum, the attack is tempestuous. Those who bow before it survive, and those who resist perish. As a result, the privileges which the feudal landlords enjoyed for thousands of years are being shattered to pieces. Every bit of the dignity and prestige built up by landlords is being swept into dust. With the collapse of power of the landlords, peasant associations have now become sole organs of authority, and the popular slogan, "All power to the peasants associations," has become a reality. Even by such a quarrel between husband and wife are brought to the peasant association. Nothing can be settled unless someone from the peasant association is present. The association actually dictates all rural affairs, and quite literally, whatever it says goes. Those who are outside the associations can only speak well of them and cannot say anything against them. Local tyrants, evil gentry, lawless landlords have all been deprived of the right to speak. None of them even dares mutter dissent. In the face of peasant associations' power and pressure, top local tyrants and evil gentry have fled to Shanghai. Those of second rate to Hong Kong. Was that Hong Kong? Hong Kong? That's the right region. I don't know. A third of those to Changsha, and a fourth of those to the country towns, where the fifth rank and still lesser fry surrender to the peasant associations in the villages. "Here's 10 yuan. Please let me join the peasant association," one of the smaller of the evil gentry will say. Who wants your filthy money?" peasants will reply. Many middle and small landlords and rich peasants, and even some middle peasants, who were all formerly opposed to peasant associations, now are vainly seeking admission. Visiting various places, I often come across such people who pleaded with me, "Mr. Committeeman from the provincial capital, please be my sponsor." In the Qing dynasty, the household census compiled by local authorities consisted of a regular register and the other register. The former were honest people, the latter for burglars, bandits, and similar undesirables. In some places, the peasants now use this method to scare those who formerly opposed the associations. They say, "Put their names down in the other register." Afraid of being entered in the other register, such people try various devices to gain admission into peasant associations, in which their minds are so set they don't feel safe until their names are entered. But more often than not, they're turned down flat. and so they're always on tenterhooks. With the doors of the association barred to them, they're like tramps, without a home, or, in rural parlance, mere trash. In short, what was looked down upon 4 months ago as a gang of peasants has now become a most honorable institution. Those who formerly prostrated themselves before the power of the gentry now bow before the power of the peasants. No matter what their identity, all admit that the world has, since last October, become a different one. It's terrible, or it's fine. The peasants' revolt disrupted gentry's sweet dreams. When the news from the countryside reached cities, it caused uproar, an immediate uproar, among the gentry. Soon after my arrival in Changsha, I met all sorts of people and picked up a good deal of gossip. From the middle social strata upwards to the Kuomintang right-wingers, there's not a single person who did not sum up the whole business in the phrase, "It's terrible." Under the impact of the views of the "it's terrible" school then flooding the city, even quite revolutionary-minded people became downhearted as they pictured the events in the countryside in their mind's eye. They were unable to deny the word terrible. Even quite progressive people said, though terrible, it's inevitable in a revolution. In short, nobody could altogether deny the word terrible. But as already mentioned, the fact is that great peasant masses have risen to fulfill their historic mission. Forces of rural democracy have risen to overthrow forces of rural feudalism. The patriarchal feudal class of local tyrants, evil gentry, and lawless landlords has formed the basis of autocratic government for thousands of years, and is a cornerstone of imperialism, warlordism, and corrupt officialdom. To overthrow these feudal forces is the real objective of this national revolution. In a few months, the peasants have accomplished what Dr. Sun Yat-sen wanted, but failed to accomplish in the 40 years that he devoted to national revolution. This is a marvelous feat never before achieved, not just in 40, but in thousands of years. It's fine. It's not terrible at all. It's anything but terrible. It's terrible is obviously a theory for combating the rise of peasants in the interests of the landlords. It's obviously a theory of the landlord class for preserving the old order of feudalism and obstructing establishment of new order of democracy. It's obviously counter-revolutionary theory. No revolutionary comrade should echo this nonsense. If your revolutionary viewpoint is firmly established, and if you've been to the villages and looked around, you'll undoubtedly feel thrilled as never before. Countless thousands of the enslaved, the peasants, are striking down enemies who battened on their flesh. What the peasants are doing is absolutely right. What they're doing is fine. It's fine is a theory of the peasants, and of all other revolutionaries. Every revolutionary comrade should know that the national revolution requires a great change in the countryside. The revolution of 1911 did not bring about this change, hence its failure. This change is now taking place. It's an important factor for the completion of the revolution. Every revolutionary comrade must support it, or he will be taking the stand of counter-revolution. A question of going too far. There is yet another section of people who say, yes, peasant associations are necessary, but they're going too far. This is the opinion of the middle-of-the-roaders. But what is the actual situation? True, peasants are, in a sense, unruly in the countryside. Supreme in authority, the peasant association allows the landlord no say and sweeps away his prestige. This amounts to striking the landlord down to the dust and keeping him there. The peasants threaten, "We'll put you in the other register." They fine local tyrants, evil gentry. They demand contributions from them. They'll smash their sedan chairs. Sedan meaning like garden chairs in this context, not like room chairs. People swarm into the houses of local tyrants and evil gentry who are against the peasant association, slaughter their pigs, consume their grain, even loll for a minute or two in the ivory inlaid beds belonging to young ladies in the households of the local tyrants and evil gentry. The slightest provocation, they make arrest. crown the arrested with tall paper hats, and parade them through the villages saying, "You dirty landlords. Now you know who we are." Doing whatever they like and turning everything upside down. They've created a kind of terror in the countryside. This is what some people call going too far, or exceeding the proper limits in a righting of a wrong, or really too much. Such talk may seem plausible, but in fact is wrong. First, local tyrants, gentry, and landlords have driven the peasants to this. For ages, they've used their power to tyrannize over the peasants, to trample them underfoot. This is why the peasants have reacted so strongly. The most violent revolts and most serious disorders have invariably occurred in places where local tyrants, gentry, landlords perpetuated the worst outrages. Peasants are clear-sighted. Who's bad, who is not, who's the worst, who's not so vicious, who deserves severe punishment, and who deserves to be let off lightly. The peasants keep clear accounts, and very seldom has punishment exceeded the crime. Secondly, a revolution is not a dinner party, or writing an essay, or painting a picture, or doing embroidery. It cannot be so refined, so leisurely and gentle, so temperate, kind, courteous, restrained, and magnanimous. A revolution is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. A rural revolution is a revolution by which the peasantry overthrows the power of the feudal landlord class without using the greatest force. The peasants cannot possibly overthrow deep-rooted authority of landlords, which has lasted for thousands of years. Rural areas need a mighty revolutionary upsurge, for it alone can rouse the people in their millions to become a powerful force. All of the actions mentioned here that have been labeled as going too far flow from the power of the peasants, which has been called forth by the mighty revolutionary upsurge in the countryside. It was highly necessary for such things to be done in the second part of the peasant movement, the period of revolutionary action. In this period, it was necessary to establish absolute authority of the peasants. It was necessary to forbid malicious criticism of peasant associations. It was necessary to overthrow the whole authority of the gentry, to strike them down to the ground, and to keep them there. There's revolutionary significance in all the actions which were labeled as going too far in this period. To put it bluntly, it's necessary to create terror for a while in every rural area. Otherwise, it would be impossible to suppress the activities of counter-revolutionaries in the countryside, or overthrow the authority of the gentry. Proper limits have to be exceeded in order to right a wrong, or else the wrong cannot be righted. Those who talk about the peasants going too far seem at first sight to be different from those who say it's terrible, as mentioned earlier. But in essence, they proceed from the same standpoint and likewise voice a landlord theory that upholds the interests of the privileged class. Since this theory impedes the rise of the peasant movement and so disrupts the revolution, we must firmly oppose it. The moment of the riffraff. The right wing of the Kuomintang says the peasant movement is a movement of riffraff, of lazy peasants. This is the current view in Changsha. When I was in the countryside, I heard the gentry say, it's all right to set up peasant associations, but the people now running them, they're no good. They ought to be replaced. The opinion comes to the same thing as the right-wingers are saying. According to both, it's all right to have a peasant movement. The movement's already in being, and no one dare say otherwise, but they say that the people running it are no good, and they particularly hate those in charge of associations at the lower levels, calling them riffraff. In short, all those who the gentry have despised, those who they've trodden into the dirt, people with no place in society, people with no right to speak, have now audaciously lifted up their heads. They have not only lifted up their heads, but taken power into their hands. They're now running township peasant associations at the lowest level, which they've turned into something fierce and formidable. They've raised their rough, work-soiled hands and laid them on the gentry. They tether the either evil gentry with ropes, crown them with tall paper hats, parade them through the villages in Xiangsang and Xing, they call this parading through the township, and Ling parading through the fields. Not a day passes, but they drum some harsh, pitiless words of denunciation into those gentry's ears. They're issuing orders and running everything. Those who use rank lowest now rank above everyone else. And so this is called turning things upside down. Vanguard of the revolution. Where there are two opposite approaches to things and people, two opposite views emerge. It's terrible, it's fine. Riff-raff, vanguard of the revolutionary. Here are apt examples. We said above that the peasants have accomplished the revolutionary task, which have been left unaccomplished for many years, and have done an important job for the national revolution. But has this great revolutionary task, this important revolutionary work, been performed by all the peasants? No. There are three kinds of peasants: rich, middle, and poor peasants. These three live in different circumstances, and so have different views about the revolution. In the first period, what appealed to the rich peasants was the talk of the Northern Expeditionary Army sustaining a crushing defeat in Jiangxi, about Chiang Kai-shek's being wounded in the leg and flying back to Kwantung, about Wu Peifu's recapture of Huichou. The peasant associations would certainly not last, and the Three People's Principles could never prevail because they had never been heard of before. Thus, an official of the Township Peasant Association, generally one of the riff-raff type, would walk into the house of a rich peasant, register in the hand, and say, "Will you please join the Peasant Association?" How would the rich peasant answer? A tolerably well-behaved one would say, "Peasant Association. I've lived here for decades tilling my land. I've never heard of such a thing before. Yet, I've managed to live all right. I advise you to give it up." A really vicious peasant might say, "Peasant Association? Nonsense! Association for getting your head chopped off. Don't get people into trouble." Yet, surprisingly enough, the peasant associations have now been established several months, and have even dared to stand up against the gentry. The gentry of the neighborhoods who refused to surrender their opium pipes were arrested by associations and paraded through the villages. In country towns, moreover, some big landlords were put to the death, like Yang Dongqiu of Xiangqiang and Yang Qu of Ningxiang. On the anniversary of the October Revolution, at the time of an anti-British rally and the great celebrations of the victory of the Northern Expeditions, tens of thousands of peasants in every township, holding high their banners, big and small, along with their carrying poles and hoes, demonstrated in massive streaming columns. It was only then that rich peasants began to grow perplexed and alarmed. During the long victory celebrations of the Northern Expeditions, they learned that Huqiang had been taken, that Chiang Kai-shek had not been wounded in the leg, and that Wu Peifu had been defeated after all. What is more, they saw such slogans as "Long live the Three People's Principles," "Long live the Peasant Associations," "Long live the Peasants," clearly written on red and green proclamations. What? Wondered rich peasants, greatly perplexed and alarmed. Long live the peasants! Are these people now to be regarded as emperors? No, the peasant associations are putting on grand airs. People from the association say to rich peasants, "We'll enter you into the other register," or "In another month the admission fee will be 10 yuan a head." Only under the impact of all of this are rich peasants tardily joining the associations, some paying 50 cents or a yuan for administration, the regular fee being a mere 10 coppers. Some securing admission only after asking other people to put in a good word for them. There are quite a number of diehards who have not joined to this day. When the rich peasants join associations, they generally enter the name of some 60 or 70-year-old member of the family, for they're in a constant dread of conscription. After joining, rich peasants are not keen on doing work for any of the associations. They remain inactive throughout. How about the middle peasants? Theirs is a vacillating attitude. They think that the revolution will not bring them much good. They have rice cooking in their pots, no creditors knocking on their doors at night. They too, judging a thing by whether it has ever existed before, knit their brows and think to themselves, can the peasant association really last? Can the three peasants' principles prevail? Their conclusion is, afraid not. They imagine it all depends on the will of heaven and think, a peasant association? Who knows if heaven wills it or not? In the first period, people from the association would call on a middle peasant, register in hand, and say, will you please join the peasant association? The middle peasant would reply, there's no hurry. It wasn't until the second period, when peasant associations were already exercising great power, that's when the middle peasants came in. They show up better in associations than rich peasants, but are not nearly as enthusiastic. They still want to wait and see. It's essential for peasant associations to get the middle peasants to join and do a good deal more explanatory work among them. The poor peasants have always been the main force in the bitter fight of the countryside. They fought militantly through 2 periods of underground work and of open activity. They are the most responsive to Communist Party leadership. They're the deadly enemies of the camp of local tyrants, evil gentry, and attack it without even the slightest hesitation. We joined the peasant association long ago, they say to rich peasants. Why are you still hesitating? Rich peasants answer mockingly, what is there to keep you from joining? You people have neither a tile over your heads nor a speck of land under your feet. It's true. Poor peasants are not afraid of losing anything. Many of them really have neither a tile over their heads nor a speck of land under their feet. What, indeed, is there to keep them from joining these associations? According to a survey of Changsha County, poor peasants comprised 70%, the middle peasants 20%, landlords and rich peasants 10% of the population in rural areas. The 70%, the poor peasants, may be subdivided into 2 categories, utterly destitute and less destitute. The utterly destitute, comprising 20%, are completely dispossessed. That is, people who have neither land or money, without any means of livelihood, and are forced to leave home and become mercenaries or hired laborers or wandering beggars. Less destitute, the other 50%, are partially dispossessed. People with only a little land or a little money who eat up more than they earn and live in toil and distress the year round, such as handcraftsmen, tenant peasants, semi-owner peasants. This great mass of poor peasants, or altogether 70% of the rural population, are the backbone of peasant associations, the vanguard in the overthrow of feudal forces, and the heroes who performed the great revolutionary task for which long years was left undone. Without the poor peasant class, the riffraff, as gentry will call them, it would have been impossible to bring about the peasant revolutionary situation in the countryside, or to overthrow local tyrants and evil gentry and complete democratic revolution. The poor peasants, being the most revolutionary group, have gained leadership of peasant associations. Both the first and second periods, almost all of the chairmen and committee members in peasant associations at the lowest level were poor peasants. Of the peasants, being the most revolutionary group, have gained the leadership of of the officials in the town associations in Hungshan County. The utterly destitute comprise 50%, less destitute 40%, and poverty-stricken intellectuals 10%. Leadership of poor peasants is absolutely necessary. Without poor peasants, there'd be no revolution. To deny their role is to deny the revolution. To attack them is to attack the revolution. They've never been wrong on the general direction of the revolution. They've discredited local tyrants and evil gentry. They've beaten down the local tyrants and evil gentry, big and small, and kept them underfoot. Many other deeds in the period of revolutionary activity, which were labeled as going too far, were in fact the very things that the revolution required. Some country governments, county headquarters of the Kuomintang, and county peasant associations in Hunan have already made a number of mistakes. Some have even sent soldiers to arrest officials of the lower level associations at the lower landlords' request. A good many governments, a good many chairmen and committee members of township associations in Hengshan and Xiangxing County. I keep pronouncing this word differently. It's Hsing. Hsing. Xiangxiang? Xiangxiang? I hate Wade Giles. I hate it. It doesn't read right to me. Pinyin reads right to me. I've been thrown in jail. This mistake is very serious and feeds the arrogance of reactionaries. To judge whether or not it's a mistake, you only have to see how joyful the lawless landlords become and how reactionary sentiments grow. Wherever chairmen or committee members of local peasant associations are arrested, we must combat the counter-revolutionary talk of a movement of riffraff and the movement of lazy peasants, and must be especially careful not to commit the error of helping local tyrants and gentry in their attacks on the poor peasant class. Though a few of the poor peasant leaders undoubtedly have shortcomings, most of them have changed by now. They themselves are energetically prohibiting gambling and suppressing banditry. Where the peasant association is powerful, gambling is stopped altogether. Banditry has vanished. In some places, it's literally true that people do not take any articles left by the wayside, and doors are not bolted at night. According to the Hengshan survey, 85% of poor peasant leaders made great progress and proved themselves capable and hardworking. Only 15% retained some bad habits. The most one can say is that these are an unhealthy minority. We must not echo local tyrants and evil gentry and undiscriminately condemning them as riffraff. The problem of this unhealthy minority can be tackled only by peasants' associations' own slogan of strength and discipline, by carrying on propaganda amongst the masses, by educating this unhealthy minority, and tightening the association's discipline. In no circumstances should soldiers be arbitrarily sent to such arrests as would damage the prestige of poor peasants and feed the arrogance of local tyrants and gentry. This point requires particular attention. 14 great achievements. Most critics of the Peasant Association allege they've done a great many bad things. I've already pointed out that the peasants' attack on local tyrants and gentry is entirely revolutionary behavior and in no way blameworthy. Peasants have done a great many things, and in order to answer the people's criticism, we must closely examine all of their activities, one by one, to see what they've actually done. I've classified and summed up their activities in the last few months. In all, the peasants, under the leadership of the peasant associations, have the following 14 great achievements to their credit. Number 1. Organizing the peasants into peasant associations. This is the first great achievement of peasants. In counties like Xiangxiang, Xiangcheng, and Hengshan, nearly all the peasants are organized. There's hardly a remote corner where they're not on the move. These are the best places. Some counties like Yiyang, Huazhong, the bulk of peasants are organized, with only a small section remaining unorganized. These places are in the second grade. In other counties like Zhengpu and Liling, while a small section is organized, the bulk of the peasants remain unorganized. These places are third grade. Western Hunan, which is under the control of Yuan Suming, has not yet reached by the association's propaganda. In many of its counties, the peasants are completely unorganized. These form a fourth grade. Roughly speaking, the counties in central Hunan, with Changsha at center, are the most advanced. Those in southern Hunan come second. Western Hunan is only just beginning to organize. According to the figures compiled by Provincial Peasant Association last November, organizations with a total membership of 1,367,727 have set up in 37 of the province's 75 counties. Of these members, about 1 million were organized during October and November, when the power of the associations rose high. While up to September, the membership had only been 300 to 400,000. Then came the 2 months of December and January. The peasant movement continued its brisk growth. By the end of January, the membership had reached at least 2 million. As a family generally enters only one name when joining and has an average of 5 members, the mass following must be about 10 million. This astonishing and accelerating rate of expansion explains why local tyrants, gentry, and officials have been isolated, why the public has been amazed at how completely the world has changed since the peasant movement, and why a great revolution has been wrought in the countryside. This is the first great achievement of the peasants under the leadership of their associations. Number 2. Hitting the landlords politically. Once the peasants have their organization, the first thing that they do is smash the political prestige and power of the landlord class, especially of local tyrants and gentry. That is, to pull down landlord authority and build up peasant authority in rural society. This is a most serious and vital struggle. It's a pivotal struggle in the second period of the revolutionary action. Without victory in this struggle, no victory is possible in the economic struggle to reduce rent and interest, to secure lands and other means of production, and so on. In many places like Hunan and Xiangxiang and Hengshan and Xiangtan counties, this is, of course, no problem, since the authority of the landlords has been overturned and peasants constitute the sole authority. But in counties like Liling, there are some places, such as Liling's western and southern districts, where the authority of landlords seems weaker than that of the peasants, but because the political struggle has not become sharp, it is in fact surreptitiously competing with it. In such places, it's still too early to say that the peasants have gained political victory. They must wage political struggle more vigorously until the landlord's authority is completely smashed. All in all, methods used by peasants to hit the landlords politically are as follows. Checking the accounts. More often than not, local landlords and gentry have helped themselves to public money passing through their hands, and their books are not in order. Now, the peasants are checking the accounts as an occasion to bring down a great many of these men. In many places, committees for checking accounts have been established for the express purpose of settling financial scores with them, and the first sign of such a committee makes them shudder. Campaigns of this kind have been carried out in all the counties where peasant movements are active. They're important not so much for recovering the money as for publicizing the crimes of the local tyrants and gentry, for knocking them down from their political and social position. Imposing fines. The peasants work out fines for offenses such as irregularities revealed by checking of accounts, past outrages against peasants, current activities which undermine peasant associations, violations of the ban on gambling, and refusal to surrender opium pipes. The local tyrant must pay so much, that member of the evil gentry so much. This sum ranges from tens to thousands of yuan. Naturally, a man who's been fined by the peasants completely loses face. Levying conscriptions. The unscrupulous rich landlords are made to contribute for poor relief, for the organization of cooperatives or peasant credit societies, or for other purposes. Though milder than fines, these contributions are also a form of punishment. To avoid trouble, quite a number of landlords make voluntary contributions to the peasant associations. Minor protests. When someone harms a peasant association by word or deed, and the offense is a minor one, the peasants collect in a crowd and swarm into the offender's house to remonstrate with them. He is usually left off after writing a pledge to cease and desist, in which he explicitly undertakes to stop defaming peasant association in the future. Major demonstrations. A big crowd is rallied to demonstrate against the local tyrant or one of the evil gentry who's an enemy of the association. Demonstrators eat at the offender's house, slaughter their pigs, consume his grain, as a matter of course. Quite a few cases have occurred. There was a case recently in Makiyaho, Xinjiang County, where a crowd of 15,000 peasants went to the houses of 6 of the evil gentry and demonstrated. The whole affair lasted 4 days, during which more than 130 pigs were killed and eaten. After such demonstrations, the peasants usually impose fines, crowning the landlords and parading them through the villages. This sort of thing is very common. A tall paper hat is stuck on the head of one of the local tyrants or evil gentry bearing the words, "Local tyrant so-and-so," or "So-and-so of the evil gentry." He is led by a rope and escorted with big crowds in front and behind. Some brass gongs are beaten and flags are waved to attract people's attention. This form of punishment, more than any other, makes local tyrants and evil gentry tremble. Anyone who's been crowned with a tall paper hat loses face altogether and can never again hold up his head. Hence, many of the people prefer being fined to wearing the tall hat, but wear it if they must, if the peasants insist. One ingenious township peasant association arrested an obnoxious member of the gentry and announced he was to be crowned that very day. The man turned blue with fear. Then the association decided not to crown him that day. They argued if he were crowned right away, he would become case-hardened and no longer afraid. It'd be better to let him go home and crown him some other day. Not knowing when he would be crowned, the man is in daily suspense, unable to sit down or sleep at ease. That is a little sadistic. Locking up the landlords in a county jail. This is a heavier punishment than wearing a tall hat. A local tyrant or one of the evil gentry is arrested and sent to a county jail, locked up, and the county magistrate has to try him and punish him. Today, the people who are locked up are no longer the same. Formerly, it was the gentry who sent peasants to be locked up. Now, it's the other way around. Banishment. Peasants have no desire to banish the most notorious criminals among local elites and evil gentry, but would rather arrest or execute them. Afraid of being arrested or executed, they run away. In counties where peasant movement is well established, almost all the important local tyrants and gentry have fled. Those who have fled to Shanghai are the safest. Those who have fled to, I'm assuming this is Hong Kong. It's in the same region, so I think it's Hong Kong. It's Hankow. I have no idea where the fuck Hankow is, so I'm assuming it's Hong Kong. Like the three that were from Huazhong, were eventually captured and brought back. Those who fled to Changsha are in greater danger of being seized at any moment by students in the provincial capital who hail from their counties. I myself saw two captured in Changsha. Those who have taken refuge in county towns are only of a fourth rank, and the peasantry, having many eyes and ears, can easily track them down. Financial authorities once explained the difficulties encountered by the Hunan provincial government in raising money by the fact that the peasants were banishing the well-to-do, which gives some idea of the extent to which the local tyrants and evil gentry are not tolerated in their home villages. Execution. This is confined to the worst local tyrants and evil gentry and is carried out by peasants jointly with other sections of the people. For instance, Yang Jisi of Ningqiang, Zhou Xiakang of Yueyang, and Fu Taonan and Sun Po-chu of Huazhong were shot by the government authorities at the insistence of peasants and other sections of the people. In the case of Yang of Hyungsung, peasants and other sections of the people compelled the magistrate to agree to hand him over, and the peasants themselves executed him. Liu Zhao of Ningxiang was killed by the peasants. The execution of Peng Jifang of Liling and Zhou Jianzhu and Cao Yong of Yiyang is pending, subject to the decision of special tribunal for trying local tyrants and evil gentry. The execution of one such big landlord reverberates through the whole county and is very effective in eradicating the remaining evils of feudalism. Every county has these major tyrants, some as many as several dozens and others at least a few, and the only effective way of suppressing the reactionaries is to execute at least a few in each county who are guilty of heinous crimes. When the local tyrants and evil gentry were at the height of their power, they literally slaughtered peasants without batting an eyelid. Hu Maihuan, for 10 years, the head of the defense corps of Xinjiang, Changsha County, was personally responsible for killing almost 1,000 poverty-stricken peasants, which he euphemistically described as executing bandits. In my native county of Xiangtang, Tang Chongying and Luo Chulin, who headed the defense corps in the town of Yinxian, have killed more than 50 people and buried alive 4 more in the 14 years since 1913. Of the more than 50 they murdered, the first 2 were perfectly innocent beggars. Tang Chunhyun said, "Let me start by killing a couple of beggars." And so the two lives were snuffed out. Such with the cruelty of local tyrants and evil gentry in the former days, such as a white terror they created in the countryside, and now peasants have risen, shot a few, and created just a little terror in suppressing the counter-revolutionaries. Is there any reason for saying that they should not do so? Number 3. Hitting the landlords economically. Oh, good God, this is long. Prohibit. God, I might cut it there. You know what? I'll do bullet points from here on out. I don't want to just completely throw this away. This is long. Hitting the landlords economically, prohibition on sending grain out of the area, forcing up grain prices, and hoarding and cornering, prohibition on raising rents and deposits, agitation for reduced rents and deposits, prohibition of canceling tenancies, reduction of interest rates. Number 4, overthrowing feudal rule of local elites and evil gentry. Number 5, overthrowing armed forces of landlords and establishing those of peasants. Number 6, overthrowing political power of the country magistrate and their bailiffs. Number 7, overthrowing clan authority of ancestral temples and clan elders, the religious authority of town and village gods, masculine authority of husbands. Number 8, spreading of political propaganda. Number 9, peasant bans and prohibitions. Number 10, eliminating banditry. Number 11, abolishing exorbitant levies. Number 12, movement for education. Number 13, the cooperative movement. Number 14, building roads and repairing embankments. Whew. And all of those have like at least 1 or 2 paragraphs. So, the spirit of this is by and large Mao making a case for the success of these peasant rebellions and arguing for their role within a larger movement. It's actually interesting reading some things. I actually had a few thoughts come to mind. I did it. Oh God, pardon me. It's now 2:15 in the morning. A few things that came up. God, like talking about it's terrible or it's fine when we're talking about protests and riots in the United States, even liberal media pushes this image of it being fires and looting and violence. While there is some of that, by and large, these protests lately have been peaceful. So it is interesting to see that reflected almost 100 years ago, halfway across the globe, with folks saying, it's terrible. They shouldn't be doing it violently. They should be doing it peacefully. But Mao here is arguing that, well, if it works, it's counter-revolutionary to criticize it. I mean, Dr. King's language, a right is the language of the unheard. Let me make sure I spelled riot backwards. Yeah. Yeah. So that came to mind. Because, yeah, even a lot of this language that people were using nearly 100 years ago, like, this isn't the right moment, we should wait until later. They talks about the middle peasants using. That's very familiar. That is incredibly familiar amongst leftist, socialist, anarchist academics and activists. Like, I just don't think this is the one, or this is the moment. And Che Guevara, if you'll remember in his guerrilla warfare, talked about there never being the right moment. The right moment is right now. There will never be a more right moment. And you can't wait for it. You have to work for it. So that was popping to mind while reading this. The growth of the movement was interesting. Him talking about it being led largely by people who had no other means is interesting. That's not surprising, but it does reverberate a little bit in this current moment that we're seeing these massive protests in a moment of almost unparalleled unemployment in the United States. Our economy, if you believe the Dow, is doing okay. But if you look at the welfare of actual human beings, it's doing terribly, right? So people are being pushed in a position where they have nothing left to lose. Yeah, yeah. And, there were some other things that popped to mind, but really it was those two. The language that we're using to describe protests and riots, in his section, it's terrible or it's fine, is really striking. And when he's talking about a revolution, not a dinner party, writing an essay or painting a picture or doing embroidery, it cannot be so refined, so leisurely and gentle, so temperate, kind, courteous, restrained, and magnanimous. Revolution is an act of insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. Now that's been on my mind because the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone has largely become a hippie co-op more than anything else. Like it's like turning into an anarchist commune, which is fine, like nothing wrong with that, all the more power to them. But people have been like partying and drinking, listening to music and dancing, going to hang out with their friends. And I've talked about, I have friends from all over the country who are like, oh man, I wish I could go, like it's some kind of fucking summer festival. And that's kind of the vibe it's giving off right now. And that's been irritating me because it's not a fucking festival. We weren't out there for 2 goddamn weeks because we wanted to throw a party. We were out there for 2 goddamn weeks because the police keep killing people and keep getting away with it. That this country institutionally has structures and foundations of racism that run to its core. We're out there because states like Louisiana have functional modern-day slavery guised as the prison industrial complex. We're not out there to have fun. We're not out there to create a cute little hippie utopia. We're not out there to create a white queer commune in the middle of a progressive affluent city that the mayor will just call a block party. And I haven't posted a lot of things being very vocally frustrated with the autonomous zone, but in my heart, this kind of frustrated rage has been the response. Like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go and volunteer my time to artificially participate in a commune that's not really a commune. It doesn't exist separate from capitalism. All of the materials there, all of the financial support, all of the logistics, all of the labor is connected to a capitalist system and supported by a capitalist system. All the donations we're getting through people working or savings or things like that. It's not generating its own revenue. It's not making its own food. It's a mask. It's a disguise. It is LARPing, I guess. It is LARPing as a revolution. So those critiques they're uncomfortable coming from people who didn't march. Frankly, they're wildly uncomfortable coming from people in other states because it's not your fucking place to say. It really isn't. Like, I feel like it's not my place to say, even though I was marching every other day. Even though I was tear-gassed that often. Even if I did march and I was there, I still don't feel like it's my place to say because it's not my fucking moment. There have been black organizers calling for the occupation of the area as a resistance, as a disruptive force. And there have been black bands performing there nightly during the protests, and now So, if that's the moment, if that's the movement, I'm not going to criticize that because it's not mine to lead. But I am kind of sitting here tearing my hair out, worrying that it's being appropriated, worrying that it's being commodified, worrying that it's being infiltrated and manipulated by liberal politics and liberal agendas and liberal attitudes. It's not revolutionary. And it doesn't have to be, because this movement isn't necessarily about being revolutionary. It's anti-racist. And some of these people are Democrats or Republicans. Some of these people believe in the United States. Some of these people believe in electoral policies and electoral politics. My God, I've heard so many people being like, "Oh, remember to vote," as if voting really substantially changes anything. And I'm deeply cynical, so I haven't voiced opposition to that, but I'm feeling opposition to it. I'm feeling my heart pushing back against a lot of what I'm seeing. Like, I don't know. I don't want to rain on anyone's parade, but I do have a lot of caution in my heart right now, and we'll see what the future holds. And we'll see where this week goes. I mean, Seattle's budget for this next year is going to be decided in the next week or few. So that'll really be a big tell if the pressure that we've been applying is adequate or not. I really hope that it is. I really hope that this doesn't just become, we're going to celebrate Juneteenth from now on as a state holiday or a city holiday and not actually meaningfully change these oppressive systems that kill people, that imprison people, and effectively enslave them. This is too fucking important to turn into fun. But again, not my moment to lead. I'll put in a cut here. If you have considered marching and haven't, if you've marched but you're tired, dude, go out. The moment is real. The moment is here. I'm talking very critically of something happening in my city, something that I fought for. But I did fight for it, and I will fight for it, and I'm still donating to support it. Just because I'm worried about the direction it's taking does not mean that I'm jumping ship. And does not mean that I advocate for jumping ship. If you pulled the parachute, cut the cord, get back in the fight. It's long and exhausting, and it's dirty work. But if we quit fighting, people will keep dying. I mean, fuck. I read 2 news stories about black men being killed in the South by police today. I mean, I read about an honest-to-God lynching that happened this week. Not like euphemistically lynching like we've been talking about, not like effective lynching, I mean tree and all. This is our country. This is our country. You can't say, "Oh, this isn't America, this isn't who we are." This is who we are. And we have to look at that, and we have to attack that, and address that, and change that. Not reform it, we need to excise it because it is a cancer. It's an infectious disease that only hurts some of us. It benefits some of us. We cannot allow it to make it another generation. Hey, I'm done grandstanding. It's been an hour. I'm sure you've heard enough. If you want to check out this report in its entirety, it's on Marxist.org. Marxist.org has a great archive. I'll post a link in the description probably. Until later? Not tomorrow? Maybe tomorrow? Who fucking knows? I have no idea what I'm doing. Until later, I'm gonna say toodaloo. Take care. See you then. Bye-bye.